Welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Norman Goodfellows, and welcome to Saint, part of David Higgs's empire, his iconic modern spin on Italian that combines some old school traditional pizza making with some very modern dishes that combine for a really exciting culinary adventure, which is exactly why I am here. Well, not entirely, because while there will be some cuisine, it is mostly the wine that I'm here to check out at Saint, in between taking on a journey to two other parts of the South African wine world. One of them is Stellenbosch, and later on in the show, I'll be taking you to Alex Starey, not in Stellenbosch, but up in Johannesburg with his brand new single site range, wines made from very particular vineyards that express so beautifully where they've come from in the hands of the masterful winemaker that is Alex Starey. So Keermont comes a little later on today. So too does a chance to sit down with a guy called Lannison, who's been working in the industry for a long time, but is relatively new to the world of wine specifically. And he takes me through not just his journey, but also pours me a glass of wine that he feels captures both the wine that he loves himself, but also the food at Saint and the environment and atmosphere and cool factor that's so endemic to this David Higgs temple of good times. First of all, though, I head to a place I first went to in my university days, where after a round of golf I got lost, was looking to go wine tasting, and upon inquiring at a farm, or at least I thought it was a farm, ended up discovering that it was really a wine estate, and it was full of wine that I fell in love with, as so many people did at the time, because the wine in question was the Diemersfontein pinotage, and it was that pinotage, that coffee pinotage, that completely changed South Africa's understanding of that style of wine. So how did it all come about? Who's the man in charge? And is there anything more to Diemersfontein than just really quirky and easily identifiable pinotage? Well, a guy called David runs the place, and I sat down to find out how Diemersfontein became the place that it is today. So it's in Wellington I find myself today on the show, and an estate I've got a slightly awkward history with, because the first time I arrived here was a little accidental, so it gives me the chance to apologise to the owner, and I think he'll take it all right, because we are fellow Ike Tigers, albeit of a very slightly different vintage. David, lovely to see you, and lovely to be back at Diemersfontein, so thank you for the warm welcome.
Dan, it's a pleasure to have you. Look forward to chatting.
Now, I have to begin with an apology. My very first visit here was accidental. I'd been playing golf with a couple of mates, and we decided we'd go do some wine tasting on our limited, just out of university budget. And we didn't know the area terribly well, and we drove in here and found our way to what we then discovered was a tasting room, and asked the gentleman who was on duty if he could point us in the direction of any good wine farms in the area, to which he rather shyly said, well, we actually do make wine here as well. And it was very serendipitous, because that we obviously apologised and said we'd love to taste here, and that is when I first discovered this fairly new, very different, very striking wine that has now become this icon, not just of Diemersfontein, but I think of South African wine, and that is your famous pinotage.
We'll forgive the insult, Dan, in the light of your subsequent adoption of it. But yes, it was an exciting start to our winemaking career here. And our then winemaker, Bertus, created something very unique in the industry. I think it was part accidental and part deliberate, as he will probably testify to. But it was very exciting, and as a new style of pinotage, it kind of took the market by storm, getting us into ABSA top 10 in the very first year of our winemaking career, and it blew our minds completely.
When this first emerged, when you tasted it for the first time, what was your opening impression?
Well, you have to remember that I started this company when I was well over 50. And I wouldn't have claimed that I had the most sophisticated of palates, and probably still don't. But at that stage, it seemed extraordinary to me. I actually, I liked the taste of it, but it left me a bit uncertain. But I only had to hand it to a few friends, and the word was, wow, this is extraordinary. And I think it's given us, as a result, a huge amount of pleasure to discover people's almost infatuation with it, for those who like it, and not everybody does. But the ones who do like it love its voluptuousness. They love its recognizability, because obviously it has such a central feature of the coffee chocolate aromas. And so it became, and we're talking 23 years ago now, it became something like a cult wine. And of course we leveraged that and had these raucous parties called pinotage on tap for many years. And that has helped consolidate it as an icon. And curiously enough, in every export country that we deal with, it leads the range. So it's got something.
And it's also sparked a number of copycats. It sent the pinotage into a brand new category. When you taste another one that sometimes have a nuance, other times on the label shouting chocolate and coffee at you, are you proud that you started this revolution, or do you go, oh, that's not the real one?
You know, I'm only human, Dan. So the latter is true. We do feel proud of the fact that we are the original, and that's if you look at the label, we call it the original. So we claim its originality, but in a way to have created a category that sells a lot more pinotage, and therefore it extends to a love of pinotage more universally. And we have, we are known as the pinotage people, and up there are two others. So we have our reserve pinotage, the Carpe Diem pinotage, which is made on new oak and doesn't have any coffee chocolate flavors. And then the Prodigy, which is a pure varietal pinotage, entry level, no oak. So we have a family of 3 pinotages. So I like to think that in people's minds, the prominence of Diemersfontein pinotage has generalized to promoting the varietal in general and a love of pinotage.
And I think that is, for the greater industry, your biggest achievement. It's where we owe you the greatest vote of thanks, and that pinotage has had a rocky road over the years, and by guiding more people into realizing, hang on, there is a lot of fun pinotage to be had, you've done a pretty important job.
Well, I do like to think that on the serious side, we've created, and the Carpe Diem has won many international trophies as well, at the more serious side of pinotage. But then there's the fun, funky, joyous, ridiculous side of when people get up to all sorts of pranks with too much coffee pinotage. And I always say, well, we take our wines extremely seriously, but not ourselves. And that then allows us to be silly when we're having some of these festivals and fun.
It's also given you this hallmark. It's what everybody knows you for, and it really has put Diemersfontein on the map and helped you to create what's been a really successful wine business, but also a really successful brand, because there is so much to Diemersfontein beyond just the wine. And before we jump into that wine, we're going to taste some in a moment, tell me a bit about this wider story and this community here that you've created.
Sue and I lived in London for 20 years, and when we came back, it was just at the time of, relatively the new South Africa. And I think our intention when we came back to this much-loved family farm, because I was brought up here as a kid. My granddad bought Diemersfontein in 1942. So I had a joyous and very privileged childhood here. And I think that the intention when we came back and changed our lives, because I was working in a very different field overseas, I wanted to come back and see whether as an employer we could do something a bit more enlightened and be part of the transformation of this country. So we've done a few things which I like to think have made a bit of a contribution. Number one is that we've created a school on site. It's called Wellington Preparatory School, and now college. It's gone from an initial preparatory school up to age 12, and then there was pressure to go up to grade 12. And we've been doing that for a couple of years now. And it's a wonderful, happy, high-end educational school. And that is, I suppose, our principal legacy. Second, of course, is the Thokozani brand. Tokozani is a company within a company, and it belongs to our staff. And that company has done pretty well. There is a wine, the Cabernet Franc, which distinguished itself at the Trophy Wine Show a couple of years ago by pulling 3 trophies. Sorry to sound a braggart, but I can't be too self-effacing. So that was really one of our highlights. A young woman winemaker, Lauren Hulsman, made that as her very first assignment, and it pulled off 3 trophies. So, you know, she's had to come down to earth slowly. She's getting there now. It's taken 3 years. But that has been one of our really precious moments. So Tokozani is both high quality wine and, I like to think, a good story. So our staff team have received dividends for the last few years. It's work in progress. There's always challenges in running a business in South Africa and being part of the transformation effort. But we do get a lot of visitors who come to say, how did you get this right? And I say we don't always get everything right, but we've had a few really fine examples of how the Tokozani company has helped transition people into much more senior positions within the company.
You've got something here called the Clockmaker. I poured some for breakfast to my friend Jason earlier on today, and he just burst into tears of joy. He felt it was a delight to drink. So if we can pour some of this, and tell me about the name, because it's obviously there for a particular reason.
Thank you. Dan, it's a fun story. My father planted some Chenin Blanc in 1985, and obviously 35 years later, it became eligible to be considered as part of the Old Vine project. So we embraced that, and we had some wine made and were really keen to launch it and thought, well, there has to be something special in this launch. What are we going to call it? And my staff team encouraged me to tell some of the old stories of Diemersfontein. And I told them about a story that I'd sort of heard of from childhood, although the incident had happened before I was born, clearly. I wasn't born during the war. It happened soon after. But during the war, there were lots of Italian prisoners of war in South Africa, as you may know. And many of them were imprisoned at Zonderwater prison up in the north part of the country near Pretoria. But many of them were sent to the Western Cape, where they were involved in engineering projects, and also some of them were sent to the farms. And 3 of them spent a couple of years as, in quotes, prisoners of war, but they were able to stay on Diemersfontein and work in what was then a farm that was committed to dried apricots. We didn't do much else, but that's what we did at those times. And one particular young man, whose name was Cesare Zanardi, was kind of adopted by my parents, who were new owners of the farm at that point. And they became very friendly, and many years later, when he went back to Italy, he created a company making clocks. And he invited my parents to come and visit, and there was a very nice interchange. My mum was presented with a clock, and that was part of the legend of Diemersfontein's wartime incarnation. And so my staff team were really excited by that. So, well, let's call it the Clockmaker, in honor of that friendship that happened in wartime. I took it a step further, and not having had any contact with the Zanardi family myself, I then used Facebook to see if I could trace whether there were still some Zanardis in Bolzano, which is where they came from. That's in the Tyrol, the northern part of Italy. And indeed, there were. His 2 children I traced through Facebook. I called them up, told them the story, and the very touching thing was that the son said to me, you know, that my father always used to say that notwithstanding the circumstances and being a prisoner of war, that he felt well treated and kind of embraced. So it was a tolerable way. If you had to be a prisoner of war, it was okay to be one at Diemersfontein. So I then reached out and said, look, we'd like to tell the story of the Zanardi family. May we do that? And they said, of course. Cesare would smile down and bless it. It was very sweet, Italian, emotional, and really a lovely story. So hence the clockmaker is named after Cesare Zanardi. And we then visited the family, invited them out to a big launch that we had here going on 2 years ago. And we had a wonderful Italian joyous day, invited some Italian friends, Italian winemakers, and that's the story. The good thing is the wine is good as well.
The wine
and
is
it's
superb.
achieved some. So that's the story. I hope it wasn't too long a story.
That's
but
a wonderful story. It's my favourite element of the whole wine industry, other than drinking really good wine, is that so many wines lead into stories like this, and they're not always quite as in-depth and warm and cheering, but that's a wonderful story. And Cesare, wherever you are, I think you'd be very, very happy with this. Let's shift over on the back of that cracking story to the wine that is so iconic, the wine that I stumbled upon accidentally 20 odd years ago, and that is the Diemersfontein pinotage. And if I can ask you to pour us a touch, and while that happens, just give me a sense of the evolution of this wine and of the brand and story around it.
Well, as mentioned, Bertus suggested that he create a new style of pinotage using oak staves, and they were medium toasted oak staves. He decided to age the pinotage on a very robust oak treatment. The grapes were pumped over, the juice was pumped over, and we got huge extraction from the juice, and that was then able to tolerate an intense oak treatment. And the interaction between that fruit and the staves produced this extraordinary phenomenon, which we now call coffee and chocolate. Some people have even asked us, do we put coffee beans into the juice? No, we don't. But some people, even by asking the question, having heard the question, say, do they put coffee beans in? And Bertus once mischievously said, oh yeah, my boss owns some shares in a coffee company, so we chuck some of that in. That didn't do us any good at all. But it was part of the legend of the way this was formed.
I think it's a great marketing campaign. It might cost you a bit, but George Clooney quietly preparing a nice coffee-flavoured pinotage.
But what we have done, obviously, is pair it with coffee-flavoured chocolates and biscuits and things like that. So we leverage people's love of coffee, actually.
And what's fascinating for me with this wine is I loathe coffee. I cannot drink the stuff. I find it abhorrent. And yet I can drink this with great ease and much delight. And then to people who don't know that I hate coffee, nod knowingly, oh, lovely mocha tones to this and a lovely hint of Arabica, knowing inside that I hate those things. But I love the wine. As we look back together on the story of Diemersfontein, there are many highlights, remembering people, developing new styles. If you were to have known then what you know now, would you have believed that this would be the point you would get to, that you would have had the success and the journey with Diemersfontein that has played out?
The short answer is no. It took me by surprise. You know, it's interesting. We also do some property development here, and we have a residential community here, and we now doing as our final swan song a small retirement centre here at Diemersfontein. And I always thought that the property development would be highly successful and help me to indulge a loss-making wine company. The reverse was true. It's been a real struggle with property, although we're getting there now. But actually the wines thrived, and I think because you have a USP, and that's got to be a lesson to everybody who starts with winemaking. You have to have some really good stories, or you have to have product that singles you out from the extraordinary competition that exists in the industry. So I was gobsmacked, shocked, and pleasantly surprised. But I have to say it's been one of the more joyous and exciting elements of my working career. So I feel very blessed by that.
Well, we are very blessed to have had what you've given us over the last 2 decades and more, from my accidental first encounter with a now iconic wine through to today, and finding out the story of the clockmaker, and spending some time with you. And also, I think most rewarding of all, I've now worked out where I'm going to spend my retirement. So if you can sign me up, I've probably got another 3-4 years till I get there, but I look forward to moving and enjoying your community.
I'll hold you to that, Dan.
Cheers, David.
Cheers. Thank you.
So the estate I accidentally stumbled upon many years ago in my university days. Diemersfontein, iconic for its pinotage, but home to so many different wines, as you saw there from David, and somewhere that is one to put on your list of Wellington wine estates to visit, as is Saint on your list of restaurants to visit in South Africa if you have not already. A place where people initially tend to come for the food, and the steak done in the pizza oven in a big Le Creuset pan is sensation. I probably have that once every second visit after promising myself I'll try something else. I never do. But it's accompanied by one of the final wine lists in Johannesburg, and that leads me rather nicely to Lannis, one of the custodians of the wine here. Before we jump into the wine at the restaurant, tell me a little bit about your wine story. How did you get into the sommelier world?
Okay, thank you so much, Dan. My name is Lannis. So I started wine with Spear Wine Farm. They were opening actually a tasting room at Spear, at Indaba Hotel in Fourways. I got trained by one of the good sommeliers there, and then they took me to Cape Town. That's where actually my journey began.
If I told you when you were, say, 15, 16 years old, one day you're going to be a sommelier at one of the best restaurants in the country, what would you have said to me?
I know, I wouldn't have, no, actually, I never thought that I could be a sommelier.
Well, that is where you now find yourself, and you find yourself at one of the great restaurants of Johannesburg. Tell me a little bit about working at Saint and the challenge of being at such a big and such an acclaimed restaurant.
The Saint is such a great place. Very nice, very busy. You meet different people with a very nice food, very nice Italian cuisine as well. I just like the vibe, and also it's in the center of, the iconic city of Johannesburg, which is Sandton. It's actually very nice. Actually, I like it a lot. Yes, I do have some challenges here and there, but I love those challenges because they make me grow. Like maybe someone chooses wines that I've never sold before, or a grape varietal that is not popular. So I actually love it a lot because I just want him to elaborate more, or to talk more about that type of grape or that type of wine.
Your challenge is principally, I'd imagine, that in Vickers, who looks after the group, you have a wine list put together that's pretty big. There's a lot of wine there. That means there's a lot of stuff you've got to know for when somebody goes, oh, hang on, Lanson, what's this one?
Yeah, it's actually got a very, very big list. And actually, I never thought, when I came in here, I was used to just a small wine farm and few varietals, but now I'm watching over a very big cellar. And actually, I'm loving it because it makes me grow. It makes me learn actually a lot about wines as well. And now, there is nothing that I don't know about that cellar. I'm actually the master of that cellar now.
We've got the right person then for the job that I asked to be done, and that was head over to that cellar and find a bottle of wine that you really like, but that also you think works really well for Saint as a restaurant. What have you chosen and why?
Oh, thank you so much. That one's actually very easy. I've chosen a Sangiovese Rubicon.
So you've said, no, South Africa, I'm going to go Italian here.
Yeah, I'm going to go Italian since we are Italian cuisine. So this actually is a very good one, very nice. So actually this one's very, very light. It goes well with the pizzas. It goes well also with some other dishes that we have here, like maybe the Wagyu. If you're having the Wagyu, it actually goes well with the Wagyu because Wagyu is so very soft and tender. And this one also goes well with that. This one goes well also with that Wagyu sirloin.
Sadly, we don't have any Wagyu with us at this very moment, but we do have the wine to try.
Exactly, yes.
As people are watching this at home, salivating, explain what you get from this wine as you taste it.
So as you nose this wine, as you know, the most pleasure that we get in wine is through the nose. As you nose this one, you get a little bit of some plums, some cherries, very easy drinking, very light as well.
It is extremely elegant, but even though it is light, as you say, it's not compromising on flavour. It's still quite rich. It's still got quite a broad palate to it.
Exactly, yes, exactly. It's actually a very good wine, especially when you are pairing with some of these meals here in these restaurants. It's actually very excellent.
And I think, Lansing, you've given me a great selection. I might just have to order a pizza and possibly some Wagyu as well to wash it all down. It's lovely wine. You've looked after me many times here. You've always got some great advice on the floor and a great wine list to go with it. You've chosen something really special here. So thank you for sharing some Sangiovese with me.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So there we go. It is an Italian restaurant, some Italian wine and a South African sommelier. It makes for a pretty good combination for a lunchtime escape. Well, from Saint, we head just up the road to somebody whose wine features on this very wine list. He's got brand new vintages, and it's the vintages from the single sites that are really standing out. Somebody whose terroir has been masterfully worked into some wine that is very sought after. The man is Alex Starey, the vineyard is Keermont, and I can tell you quite happily the results are spectacular. If you've watched enough of Dan Really Likes Wine, then you'll know that my mother Helen and her husband Philip represent about 12% of Northern Ireland's wine consumption on an annual basis. They're very dedicated and devoted South African wine fans and are always arguing furiously over what's best and who gets to finish the majority of a particular bottle. And they do have a range of favourites, and those names come up on a regular basis, but there's one they particularly like, and that is an estate called Keermont, and they like it for two chief reasons. One of them is that they really do enjoy the wine, they've had a fair bit of it, and the other is that they've been to visit once, and I think 8 hours after they arrived, politely but firmly the Keermont team asked them to leave, and they have been celebrating that visit ever since, which means I know they'll be watching very excitedly today, because the winemaker and surfer-in-chief at Keermont is my guest on the show. Alex, lovely to see you. I must apologise, I think it took 6 security guards to get the aging pair that are my mum and her husband out of Keermont. But they're like so many people, they absolutely love coming to visit. And you've got this really dedicated fan base who love your wine, but also just love coming to see you and hang out at one of the great wine estates of the Cape.
Yeah, Dan, it's a really special place. That valley is absolutely beautiful, and I think people just get completely overawed by it when they drive up there. And we love having them there. You know, if people make such an effort to come to us, it is a long way to go, that we want to make sure that they have a good time and they enjoy themselves. So,
how important is it for you in creating that emotional link? Because somebody will come and they might buy a bottle, they might buy a case, maybe half a dozen cases if you're really lucky. It's not going to on its own change the needle on the entire year's income. But I would imagine it does have quite a big impact when collectively you're gathering up this army of fans who've been there and feel a really strong link to who you are.
We started off as such a tiny producer that a tasting room wasn't even really on the agenda, and we never really valued it very highly. But since opening for tastings, and you know, at a stage where maybe the sales weren't going so well, and we were like, okay, well, we better open up a tasting room. Since opening that and inviting people into the farm, it's amazing the change in perception of the place. Like, we really do have very loyal customers now, friends, and it actually contributes more significantly to the bottom line than you think. It really does make a big difference these days, both directly and then obviously the indirect. I think once people have been there, if they go into a restaurant, they see your name on a wine list and they're like, oh, I love Keermont, we went there once. And yeah, so it's I think it's, the whole thing has evolved quite a lot since the early days, but that's has made a big difference.
Now, one of the things I think would fuel that, my mum loved the wine. She loved the fact that she was allowed to dance on the table with her friend Janine. But she also said that she loved the fact that people would point out from your team, from your staff, where the wine she was drinking came from. And you've got this single series selection that allows you to point out to people, not only this is why the wine is so good, but that's exactly where we get it from.
Yeah. I think, Keermont, very core to our story is that all of the wine is grown, produced, and bottled right there, and it's such a beautiful little valley going up there, and it's lovely to be able to stand and say, oh, well, that's the Cabernet over there, and that's the Syrah, so that is very important to us. So we've, in this series that we're looking at today, it really is sort of the microscopic look at that. Where the other wines are sort of blends of different vineyards on the farm, this is really like something quite specific. But it is lovely to have the winery right in the middle of the farm there.
Well, let's start with the headline act for us today, with having a look at your new releases and those single sites. And it's the kind of thing which people might raise an eyebrow and go, no, this is just marketing. This is another winemaker trying to convince us to buy more wine than we should by flogging us some story, because it's Syrah in this case, but they're both from the same wine estate. They can't possibly be that different. This is obviously just a story made up by a winemaker, when in fact it's actually not. And I think we've got the first two of these to try. You've got two Syrahs. I've been drinking quite a lot of Syrah of late because we are making such beautiful examples in South African wine that's really fueled by a sense of elegance and a sense of, I think, slightly gentler winemaking than perhaps is always the case with this grape. The first of two, what defines this one? What is it? Why does it stand out for you?
So the two Syrahs were actually key to us starting the single vineyard project, because we have, we actually have three blocks which go into the Keermont Syrah. One is called Steepside, which is the first wine in the glass. The second is Topside, and then we have one called Sweetwater, which is down on the valley floor. And we combine those three to make the Keermont Syrah. And the reason why we started the single vineyard series was I was doing a tasting with Mark, who's the owner, and we will taste through the barrels together, and the marked difference between the two barrels, the one Steepside and the other one Topside, was so vast. And I was just like, and he was like, well, what difference, what did we do differently here? And I said, nothing. We did everything exactly the same, but they taste completely different. And it really is more of a geeky thing than trying to just sell more wine. It was more like, wow, look at the difference between these two things. Wouldn't it be lovely to show that to people, And so that's really what we were trying to do with that very first release, which was the 2012s, was just to show people, like, this one's on this side of the farm, the Steepside's on the other side of the farm, and they just taste completely different.
I think back to a visit I did the year before last to Newton Johnson, and Bevan had very unusually got up before lunchtime to show me two of his vineyards, and in this case it was the classic Sea Dragon Wind and Sea,
Yes.
and they are a couple of feet apart from each other, and yet two not dramatically different wines, but two appreciably different wines. And I suspect the same thing here, in very simple terms that even I can understand. What is contributing to the difference between the steep side and the top side?
So here, it really, and this is not just marketing jargon, it truly is the terroir, because the vine age is very similar. They're both planted, I think they were planted 1 year apart. So the steep side was planted in 2005, top side's 2006. So there's really no massive difference in the age. The clones that we use, the clonal material is pretty much the same. I like to actually focus on one specific clone, which is called SH470. It's a Hermitage clone, and I really like the wine that we make from it. So we actually take the grapes from the same sections in the vineyards. But Keermont is in a beautiful valley. You drive up this road and you have the Stellenbosch mountain on your left-hand side and the Helderberg on the right. And one of the blocks is on the Helderberg. It's north-facing. That's the steep side. So being north-facing, it gets more sun. Elevation is quite similar, but the soils are a little bit more clay-based. And then the top side is on the Stellenbosch mountain side, and that is more sort of sandstone, slightly more sandy soil, a little bit more rocky, a little bit cooler because it's west facing, and truly that's the difference between the two wines, and we can't say to people, oh well, we age one in a different type of barrel, or they're made the same, but the wines end up tasting completely different purely based on the site that they're from.
Before we try the other one and then do them in comparison, how long did it take you to fully appreciate the differences and the potential to extract from these two sites to make the best of what they had, not just in common but also in contrast?
Look, it's, our winemaking is very basic, and I think we were almost in awe of this difference, and that's why we did it. What's been really interesting is now, obviously, we've been doing it for a number of years. This will be, we started in 2012, so we're sort of 6 years into it. And the interesting thing is how those two vineyards seem to deliver the same difference every year. And that's been really, really, really interesting. I mean, we were aware that they were different, but that they were going to deliver that sort of same line of wine year in, year out has been really interesting. And now when I pick them up next to each other, I can pretty much say it before I even taste them. I know kind of the top side's going to be like this and the steep side's going to be like that. The interesting thing for me is always watching people's reaction to it, and they immediately notice this difference. But then to say to them, okay, well, which one do you prefer? And just to see, like, some people love that sort of more brighter red fruit character. Other people like that sort of more serious savory character. So, yeah, that's always been fascinating.
All right, well, you can watch my response as I grab the other one. So steep side versus top side.
Yeah, so steep side was the first one that we had, and then the top side's the second one.
And as I sample it, what's standing out for you about the top side as opposed to the steep side?
The steep side is the first thing that I generally find with it is that the steep side, because it's sort of brighter red fruit and ripens probably in a warmer slope, is more accessible or more attractive earlier on. Where the top side, I find it's from a cooler site, it's a little bit more reserved. It doesn't scream as much. But on the palate, where the steep side is full of lovely ripe fruit, the top side generally tends to be a little bit more linear, a little bit more serious, a little bit, like I say, a bit more reserved, a bit more maybe meaty and sort of those darker cherry characters on it. And a little bit more tannin, a bit more acid, and it's quite interesting because I find that the people that seem to be more serious about wine, they tend to go to the top side, which is more reserved, a little bit more structured, and the people who are maybe prefer like just drinking wine, they'll lean towards the steep side, even though they're both quite serious wines, because it's more approachable. Yeah,
I would nudge towards the top side, but it's kind of like, am I picking Messi or Ronaldo? You've got two wonderful wines.
Yeah, there's been a very nice comparison in the past by a couple of the wine writers where they've compared the steep side to sort of more. They obviously you have the Northern Rhone, which is Syrah-based wines, where steep side is more the granitic soils like you would find in Cornas or maybe Saint Joseph, and then when you go north to Hermitage or Côte Rôtie, you get that more sort of linear style of wine, and that's more the top side, which I don't want to make it sound more fancy than it is, but it's a nice comparison.
But the fact that you're diving into such detail that other people are making these comparisons doesn't, I think, say a lot just about your wine, but also where we are with Syrah in South Africa. And I think back to the last year or two, people like Jancis Robinson, who spent some time in South Africa, in terms of red wine, this has been the grape that she's felt that we've been doing the best, and she's not the only person who said that. So we're clearly getting into a space with Syrah where we can have these sorts of conversations because we are doing it that well.
Yes, I agree. I think some of our best red wines are either Syrah varietals or Syrah-based wines. And I think it's well suited to, it can handle the heat, it ripens quite quickly. You don't need to wait for those tannins to ripen. It doesn't have that sort of heavy tannin that a lot of the Bordeaux varieties or possibly some other things would have. So you can pick it relatively sort of lower alcohol, and you know that those tannins are going to be accessible. So it is well suited to our climate, definitely.
Do you have a favourite child?
Between these two? No, one's never allowed to have a favorite child out of all of the wines. I always explain it in such a, because a lot of people say, oh, well, which one's your favorite? My head always says topside, because it's such a unique site. I love rocky vineyards. It's positioned right up in the fynbos, completely surrounded on all four sides by fynbos. And it's dry land. The view is beautiful from it. So my head always says topside, but when the wines are younger, longer, steep side is definitely more approachable. And in this vintage, the 2018, the other day I picked up the steep side, and without, and again, not trying to, the winemakers never try to sound like marketers, but it really, like, I tasted it and I was like, geez, did we actually make this? You know, did we, like, was this something that we put together? I was so thrilled with it. And it's not often, like, often I'll look at our wines and I'm like critical of, oh, it should have, I did this too much, or I did that too much. When I picked up the steep side the other day, I was really, like, thrilled. I was like, wow, we made that, you know, which is lovely. Yeah, so it's a nice feeling.
Oh, it's a triumph in both glasses.
Oh, great.
And I also love the fact that it is just 2018. You have given
Yes.
it that bit more time.
Yes, yeah. That's something which with the Keermont wines you will notice. They're never like these straight off the press wines. You know, we've got quite a large facility there. We've always stored our wines for a certain amount of time before releasing them, and I think it's a real treat to be able to sell people a wine, you know, 4 or 5 years after you've made it. You know, you've already taken that first step into the maturing of the wines. So you're giving somebody something which is already accessible. It's going to age obviously a bit longer, but they can actually open the bottle and it will already start having those lovely dusty sort of secondary notes. Yeah.
And also suggesting that, drink them now very happily, but absolutely no rush.
Yeah.
And lovely to be able to compare those. They're not the only single site, so before I let you rush off for another tasting, a wine I'm really keen to sample here, because it's a wine that I just find over the course of the last few years, I'm not just seeing more of on its own, but I'm seeing more of better. You know, Cabernet Franc's history has often been in South Africa as a member of the chorus rather than the star itself.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think we're seeing a number of blends where Cabernet Franc is a bit more central, but also just loads of Cabernet Franc on its own. And as long as you avoid the overly green nature that can sometimes slip into, I think we're showing time and again in South Africa we can make this really nicely.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, we planted Cabernet Franc. This block was planted in 2006, and if you remember back correctly, you had Chris Keat at Cordoba at that time, who was making the Crescendo, which has now become the Taibosch Crescendo. But Chris was sort of, I wouldn't say he was pioneering Cabernet Franc, but he was really highlighting it, and particularly in our area. And we decided there and then to plant this beautiful site up on the Stellenbosch mountainside to Cabernet Franc, and that you know, people were like, well, why are you planting so much? Because at that time it was obviously a smaller variety. And it's lovely to see now that people are making pure varietal Cabernet Francs and including it in a greater proportion in their blends as well.
You probably go back to somebody like Brewer Raats for really starting to give it a nudge in the right direction. But I think it's taken a while to maybe fully believe in Cabernet Franc. Is that fair? And if so, why do you think it took us that long?
It's difficult to change perception, you know. Cabernet Sauvignon has such a strong following internationally. It's not just here in South Africa, but you go anywhere in the world and people, that's one variety that they know. And it's such a strong character variety as well. You know, you have so much gravitas behind the wine. So it's almost like saying, oh, yeah, but it's also got actually an older sister that is also a beautiful wine. It's different, but it's getting people off that sort of what they know and onto something different, which is always the challenge for us. But also, you know, it's a beautiful varietal, and in so many ways it's so different to Cabernet Sauvignon. You know, I think for me the attraction is just that sort of slightly gentler structure. It doesn't quite have that like really heavy tannin, even though the tannin is there. And that slightly more herbal nature that you mentioned, without it getting out of control, you know. What I love about our version of the variety is that sort of bright red cherry character which comes through, and the moment that I smell the wine, like I've always loved that about this block. It gives us this beautiful cherry character. Then you've got those herbal notes, but it's also, you know, it's only just as like a nuance to the wine.
It's absolutely lovely, and I was going to ask you to explain to the Cabernet Sauvignon drinker why they should drink Cabernet Franc. You've already done that for me, which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah.
It's smashingly good fun to drink, and it completes the 3 reds in the single series. We can't finish off without having a try of the 4th and final of the single vineyards. and that's some Chenin. And single vineyard Chenin is not a new story in South Africa, but I feel it's one that you guys have played a really important role in developing.
Yes, we've been making this wine for a number of years now. It's a particularly unique site. I believe it's one of the oldest blocks of Chenin Blanc in Stellenbosch. It was planted in 1971 by the Roux family, who used to farm the Keermont farm, which was what Keermont is part of. And the Roux family planted this block. It used to go to the KWV. In fact, I believe they used to make some of the wine in a shed on the farm and then transport it in a tanker down to the KWV. David Trafford, back in I think the late 90s, started to make a little bit of wine from this block, and he loved it. He entered it into a competition which was the Chenin Blanc Challenge, or Trophy Chenin Blanc Challenge at the time that the wine magazine used to run, and it actually ended up winning the one year, the wine specifically from this vineyard. When I started making wine at Keermont, we continued to supply grapes, and we still do, to Dave Trafford. But after a while, it became he sort of realized that the little bit of Chenin that we were getting off this vineyard wasn't worth us splitting. So he was like, you know what, if you give me more Cabernet, you can have the Chenin. That was the deal at the time. And he kindly let us continue to make the wine from this block. It used to go into our Terrassa, our white blend. And then when we started with the single vineyard series, we actually identified that we should really highlight the quality in this block. So we've been making it, I think the first vintage was 2013, 2014, around that time, as a varietal wine. And it's just, I call it the grand old dame of the property. It's the, I used the picture earlier in a tasting of, I always think of my grandmother, who used to wear these beautiful pearls and lovely sort of cashmere and that sort of stuff. And she was always so presentable. She was very, very glamorous in her old age. And I always think about the block like that. It's old, it's gnarled, it's got a lot of character, but it always presents itself in this beautiful, elegant way. And so this wine has become a very important part of our story. Today we only make several barrels of it. We literally, from the whole vineyard, we make, I think this year we ended up with 4 2.5 liter barrels. But it's an important wine, so we promote it as such. Yeah.
And there is a lovely richness to it, and we drink it a lot for, amongst many reasons. Riverside is the name of the home that my mum lives in Northern Ireland, so she has a particular attraction to it. But it's also a wine that I think we've shown here in the order that we've drunk it. It's got that character to it, that if you want to follow on from 3 really good bottles of fairly big red in themselves, you can do so quite happily.
Exactly. It's a really complex, layered wine. I think that also comes from the different soil types. We pick it because the yield is so low. It takes us ages to actually fill a press, and we use just a little basket press on the farm. So we need about 30 cases of grapes to do that. So in a day, we'll normally only pick 30 cases out of this block. So we identify a portion in the block which is ripe, and then we'll pick that, and then a day later, maybe a few days later, we'll come back and get the next lot. So you end up, even though it's a very small production, you end up with a lot of complexity in the wine. And that's why it's nice to drink it after the reds, because it really does stand up to that.
It's been an unusual but very welcome order.
Yes.
And as usual, it has been a quartet of terrific wines. So thank you. Thanks. And good luck to everybody trying to get their hands on them, because I don't think they'll be around for very long.
Yeah, small production, and we really try to pinpoint like the top end of the quality that we can achieve on the property there. So, yeah, thanks, Dan.
So there we go. It's something I really love about South African winemakers. When they do something like this, they realise they've got an exceptional site, and they decide, you know what, we're going to make the very best of it. We're going to produce some wine. Might not be in the biggest numbers, but it's going to be incredibly special. And with these 4 in Keermont, that's exactly what you've got. So that was Alex, member of the Cape Winemakers Guild, and his single site selections. What I love about the fact that he produces these is he's quite happy to take 2 wines of the same varietal that are so close to each other and yet produce wine that's got appreciable nuance and difference to it. That really is the mark of a great winemaker. And it's wines like Alex's that end up in rooms like this. This is the cellar at Saint. I had to bribe a very large security guy called Tapelo to let me in. Hopefully management don't catch me before I am done, because I love coming into this room and I love soaking up wine, either seeing wine that I've had before or looking at wine that I maybe haven't had a try of. And I also love seeing, for instance, if you look here, you've got a big name like Laurent Perrier, but then you've also got a Marie Lush, new, young, black South African brand that is not just comparing itself to these wines, but finding itself on the same wine list. And that's a big part of the success of Saint, the fact that yes, you've got your Bilcart Samels and your Moutet Chandons and some of the great wines of the world, that you've also got a very strong South African focus, and Vickers and his team of sommeliers are really good about delivering exactly that. Throw in the food of David Higgs, and it's no surprise that you can rock up on a Tuesday for lunch at Saint and find it difficult to get a table. That's how popular it is. The food is really good, but it's the wine and the attention to detail therein, as showcased by Lanison a little earlier on, that makes it such a special place to drop in on. And that wraps us up for the show this week. A big thank you to Alex and the team at Great Domains, and a big thank you too to David and his team at Diemersfontein, home of not just some rather unique and hard to miss pinotage in a beautiful stretch of the Wellington Wine Valley. That does it for this week. From Saint to David to Tapelo and the team, thanks for having us. We'll see you back again next week. This is Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Norman Goodfellows. Goodbye.